Welcome to your year 2021 Zodiac forecast. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. Thank you so much for joining me. I'd be honoured if you'd subscribe to my channel. Now I'm going to provide a penetrative insight for each of the 12 zodiac signs, so please stay with me for that. But just to say, if you'd like to ascend beyond your zodiac sign, which is just based on the location of the sun and how the planets interact with that, and find out what this new year will hold for you as an individual, there is nothing more accurate and telling than a personal forecast. Now you can get your 12-month personal forecast for 2021 plus a character analysis for 30% off, a special offer. Please see the link below. But also know, if you order in 2020, I'll give you the rest of 2020 free. So if you order in October, you get October, November, December, plus the following 12 months. Now your zodiac forecast is going to be of great interest to you, of course, and it does give us a fascinating insight into what we can expect. But of course, the zodiac or the horoscope contains much more information than just our sun. And that's where that personal horoscope comes in. But also, as we start each year, we have a solar return. And I want you to think of that solar return at midnight on the 1st of January 2021 as like your personal birth chart. It gives us a blueprint of what we can all expect collectively for this new year. So I'm going to share that information next. But when I go into your zodiac forecast, I'll be sharing different wheels, the different eclipses, to give you a really big opportunity to get a feel for what's coming for you. But astrology is basically the study of time. And when events happen in the past, when particular planetary alignments occur, when we look forwards to see when those alignments will happen again, it gives us a bit of a clue of what we can expect. And the fascinating thing, of course, is that as 2020 came to a close on the 5th of December, Saturn moved back into Aquarius. It had been there from the 22nd of March to the 2nd of August, 2020. But it moves from the cold sign of Capricorn, which it governs in its dignity. It's the sole ruler of Capricorn. And it moved into the sign of Aquarius, where it's the co-regent, along with Uranus. Now it was joined on the 20th of December by Jupiter. And then on the 21st of December, they came into a conjunction. And that conjunction is still there. It's not quite exact, but it's still there as we begin this new year. Now, what we can learn from those past events is that the last time this happened was in fact in 1405. So a very, very long time ago. And that was on the 7th of January. And I think what began at that time was the Cultural Revolution in a way. So what we can expect this year is a revolution, that's for sure. And of course we were seeing elements of that revolution beginning last year. And part of the revolution can be evolution. It doesn't always have to be turbulent, but there are certain parts of what happened in 2020 that were, of course, very turbulent. Now, the conjunction that goes between the planets of Jupiter, which is about expansion and growth and optimism, and Saturn, which is about resistance, obstacles, boundaries, tradition, usually happens just under every 20 years, about 19.8 years. This is because Jupiter takes 11.8 years to go through its cycle, and Saturn takes 29.5 years to complete its cycle. And over the last 1,000 years, predominantly, the three signs that this conjunction has occurred in most of all are of Sagittarius, Capricorn, and Pisces. So that's what makes this Aquarius conjunction so absolutely blindingly exciting. Now, it's also true to say that the eclipse cycle that we welcomed in on the 14th of December 2020 was the Saros cycle that is featuring the polar axes of Sagittarius and Gemini. Now, that began on the 30th of May 1984 in the sign of Gemini with a solar eclipse. And if we look back to when eclipse cycles begin, that gives us a big idea of what they may bring in their wake. So that one had Saturn and Mars conjunct in the sign of Scorpio, very much to do with finance, but also to do with desire, could even say lust. But Saturn, of course, is about discipline, it's about those structures, and Mars, certainly in its second home zone of Scorpio, is very much about desire. So you can see that a certain amount of repression would come from that particular conjunction, but also the potential to work very hard on resources. And I think in terms of the material world, there's been a lot of development since 1984, and some people would argue a lot of growth. But on the other side of the heavens, where the eclipse occurred, not only did we have the solar eclipse in the wonderful, quick-witted Gemini, we also had Venus there, which is very flirty and alluring and attractive. But we also had Chiron, and that is the wounded healer, and that was conjunct the North Node and Venus. So for me, this pattern that we're beginning this year, or picking up the thread of, which has been rejuvenated by the solar eclipse in Sagittarius on the 14th of December, which forged an amazingly positive angle to Mars. So I think we're all going to be feeling a lot more hopeful as we come to the end of this year, because last year, 2020, was just so terribly trying. I think we are going to have a much greater sense of momentum, a much greater sense that something is shifting and moving in our consciousness, our way of being. But I think that gathering of energy back in 1984 in Gemini was really a lot to do with the way society has changed since then, not just in a material sense, but also in a social sense. So we've seen a mass transformation in the way we consume information, the media, which has come through the internet, and of course printed media has declined quite sharply, but they're very much governed by the sign of Gemini. So we could say that Chiron, the wounded healer, being in that part of the situation in conjunction with Venus, points towards a wound in what we believe in. And I think with that energy all clustered together based on universal central time in the 8th house of transformation, very Scorpionic itself, and Mars and Saturn in conjunction in Scorpio, we have had a lot of lust since 1984, and we have had a lot of challenges to ideas, because if we go back to that time, I think there was much more of an orthodox that most people were expected to fit into. People have found their voices, they expect to have their voice. Now on the other side of the heavens, with the solar eclipse that occurred on the 14th of December 2020, Sagittarius energy is about the higher principle of communication. So it's about philosophy, it's about the intellect, it's about history, travel, it's about borders. It can be about laws and regulations, but it's very much to do with trying to find the higher principles of society. And because it forged an amazing link with Mars, I think both being fire signs, after the really pulverizing difficulties of 2020, which saw the end of an eclipse cycle between the axes of Cancer, which is ruled by the moon, so that's very much to do with emotion, the family, security, the seas, the waters, if you like, and on the other side, the harsh, cold reality of business, big industries, and materialism in perhaps its most extreme form, which has battled with the need to find emotional security on the other side of the heavens in Cancer. So we've had this big battle going on over the last couple of years, which has really been very difficult. And I feel that obviously there are some institutions, some business strands, some countries which will try to withhold or to hold on to power in a very oppressive way. And on the other side of the heavens, we had the moon is the repressed emotions that have been held down for a long time, especially to do with civil rights and people speaking up much more ardently about what they want. So the Sagittarius energy that is coming along, which re-evokes that first 1984 eclipse in Gemini, when this Saros eclipse cycle began, is very much about communication and information. So this year we're going to see a lot of sharing of ideas, that's for sure. And of course, we're seeing a lot of polarization in people's viewpoints and a lot of outspoken expression of ideas, and sometimes not enough tolerance. So that's an interesting principle. So as we come into this new year, although Saturn is the co-ruler of Aquarius, and of course it was co-present with Jupiter over the last year as Jupiter made its way through the sign of Capricorn, where of course it's not at its best, it's in its fall, and we've had a fall in the stock market. And also if we look back to when Jupiter and Pluto were last together, that was in 2008 in Capricorn, we had a fall in the stock market. If we go back to that eclipse cycle beginning in 1984, guess where Jupiter was? Yes, in Capricorn. And guess what happened that year? Yes, we had a fall in the stock market. It wasn't perhaps as quite as catastrophic as 2008 or perhaps even 2020. And that might be because when Saturn and Mars are together, particularly in the sign of Scorpio, which is very much about marshalling investments and pensions and all the rest of it, I think that Saturn was probably a stabilising influence, and all that Gemini stuff was in the 8th house of business anyway. But the Dow Jones did shrink 4% in 1984, so we can see as Jupiter makes its way through Capricorn every 12 years or so, it's not for the best when it comes for finance, investment, business generally. So as we come into this new year, Jupiter and Saturn are together and they are still co-present, and some astrologers would argue therefore that because Saturn is the co-ruler of Aquarius, the traditional ruler, that some of the more cool repressive energies of Capricorn will still be to the fore. And they could be right. But for me, I think it's more about detachment. So what we're going to get over the next 2.25 years as Saturn makes its way through the sign of Aquarius is the Aquarius energies of kindness, of fairness, of truth can be melded to the more reserved nature of Saturn. So, for example, home working is very Aquarius, which has come about more because of COVID-19. It's very Aquarius, very independent. It's using technology, which Aquarius also welcomes for its modern ruler of Uranus. But in actual fact, I think it's going to lead to a lot of creeping isolation. I think people could kind of start to see that the world could become a kind of dystopianly detached place, which is not necessarily quite the utopia that people talk about for the Aquarian age. But that's where Jupiter can be a modifying influence for the cooler energies of Saturn. And I think the two together, as we turn into this new year, are going to be for the good. So this year is going to see Sagittarius and Gemini eclipse energy, apart from one lunar eclipse which will occur in the sign of Taurus. But what's really important is that Neptune, the planet of dreams, is going to be impacting all of these eclipses and also the North Node as we go through the whole of this year. The North Node is the kind of emotional direction of travel or society. It's in Gemini. It returns to 1 degree Gemini by the end of the year. But of course it's an air sign, just like Saturn and Jupiter begin the year in. So that airiness can be there, but that watery, eroding energy of Neptune can provide distortion. And I think the thing that's really going to be at stake this year, just as much as it has been in recent years, is the whole concept of the truth. You know, when we've got big media platforms saying it's not their role to govern the truthfulness or accuracy of what people say because everyone is entitled to an opinion, we're heading into really dark territory in my viewpoint. Traditional media, even if you're not a fan, has to live to certain parameters that come from regulation, even if sometimes they have stepped outside of it, probably quite often. But there is some regulation in place, whereas a lot of new media doesn't have any regulation, and that means that truth or facts get distorted to suit particular people's agendas. And I think we are going to still continue to have a lot of that in 2021. Now, the other thing that perhaps is not quite so well known is that although Jupiter will like being in Aquarius, and it is going to be much more expansive than it has been in the sign of Capricorn, it's not going to stay in Aquarius for the whole of this year. It's going to move mid-May into the sign of Pisces, and it's going to be there through to the 27th of July. Now, Jupiter, in fact, is the ruling planet or the co-ruler of Pisces, so it's returning home. And so that's an interesting one, but it does start to go into retrograde from the 20th of June for 4 months. So I think we might see a revival initially in the cruise industry by the middle of May. We might see bookings starting over again if COVID is coming back under a bit more control, as I believe it will. But I feel that once that retrograde begins, it is going to be very interesting how that affects the cruise industry. And the other thing I need to tell you is that in astrology, when we take a particular point like that solar return at the start of the year, we get a map just like your personal horoscope. And that solar return, I've created it based on universal central time. And the ascendant is actually in Libra, which is very much about finding balance. But the midpoint between the sun and the moon's in the sign of Leo as we begin this new year, and the sun will be in Capricorn as usual. So the midpoint between the two is 21 degrees in Libra. So this is going to be very much a Libran year. And 21 degrees Libra is quite a fascinating point, because it is going to be next to, or very close to, a fixed star which has the characteristic of both Saturn and Jupiter. And that fixed star is called Foramen. And Foramen is very much to do with journeys, particularly sea journeys. It's said to be broadly optimistic, but it can see passages from quite tumultuous events to much more enlightened understanding. And that seems to be where the world is at the moment. We have an opportunity to change how things are, but just finding a vaccine for COVID is not the answer. Many of us won't take it. And of course, many of us don't want to be ruled by fear, so we're going to carry on our lives. So it's an interesting fixed star to have on that midpoint, but also the midpoint is ruled in terms of the 12th harmonic, or the Dward, by the sign of Gemini. So, I'm talking about this Saros eclipse series being very much to do with the polarities of Gemini and Sagittarius. Gemini, quick wits, communications, sharing of information, and the higher energy of Sagittarius. Now, like all zodiac signs, I'm not talking in terms of your zodiac sign or how you live within your zodiac sign, because we all have a choice to live to the best of our zodiac signs, or there is a more base instinct within each zodiac sign, and everybody has a choice. But this year predominantly is going to be about finding balance, it is going to be about communication, and it is going to be about trying to find a search for truth. Now, I mentioned before, what did I say for 2020? Well, the midpoint was actually in Aquarius, and it was conjunct Venus. And Venus in Aquarius is very much about us as a collective. And also it was in the 4th house, which is about our sense of security. But we also had Neptune conjunct the moon as the solar return began for 2020. Quite incredible. So the Neptune in the sign of Pisces, which it governs, conjunct the moon. And Neptune is very much about gases, infections. It can be about uncontainable situations. It can be about distortion. It was also potentially very much about spirituality. It's about healing. But having that conjunct the moon for the world collective, where we all found out that wherever we lived in the world, we were all connected to the same issue like never before. That's quite extraordinary. And the other thing that all astrologers knew, of course, was that we had the posse in Capricorn of Saturn, Jupiter and Pluto. So most astrologers believed that there would be a crash in the stock market, so we weren't wrong about that. But the implications of this infection, COVID-19, very much was there in the stars. So this year, you can see that Neptune energies are still going to be very important, and that potential for distortion or dishonesty, perhaps from politicians particularly. It can be to do with how information is shared on social media platforms particularly, but it can also be to do with our imagination, or that we have choices about the way we want to live our lives. But Sagittarius generally is very much about travel, and I think the travel industry will get revived this year, but I think we're going to see changes. So we're going to see more temperature tests at airports and ports. We may see some very quick COVID tests being enacted, which will give very quick results, and we'll start to see more and more travel picking up. It's a fact, because people don't like to be contained. And Sagittarius energy is about adventurism. It's about being very independent. And last year was very much about being locked in, which was very uncomfortable for many of us, because above all else, Sagittarius energy is about individual freedom. So this year is a very, very exciting year. It does give us an opportunity to bounce back. It's not going to be without big challenges. We do have a very pressing right angle between Saturn and Uranus, the two rulers of Aquarius, which is going to go on to about the 31st of July. It comes back from around about the last 5 days of November to the end of the year. And that's a really difficult aspect, I feel, because Uranus, of course, is in the sign of Taurus, and that's very much to do with resisting change. Taurus likes continuity, whereas Uranus likes to shake things up. So our attitude to the earth, environmentalism, how we live, how we consume, which Taurus energy is very much about as well. It's what we enjoy eating, drinking, spending our money on. Bit of luxury. We love, all of us love a bit of luxury. But that's being tempered by this potential new world order that Jupiter and Saturn initially are bringing in the sign of Aquarius, plus that solar eclipse energy that really came in with such a hurtling ferocity in its wonderful trine with Mars on the 14th of December. We've had Venus move in mid-month December into the sign of Sagittarius. So it's a much freer, looser energy as we come into this new year. But stay with me now to get the inside track on your zodiac sign, because I really feel that this is a year that we need to be informed about like no other. Hello Virgo, and welcome to your Zodiac or Ascendant forecast for 2021. This year begins with the solar return, that point when the sky gives us a blueprint of what the next 12 months can hold. And for you, the midpoint between the sun, which is in the glorious Capricorn for you, very much about self-expression, is the moon is in the sign of Leo, which is very grand and proud, but it is quite a sensitive location for you. But the midpoint between them is in the sign of Libra, and for you that's your second solar house. So I think the foundations, the basis of your existence is going to be very much to the fore and supported by that combination, that wonderful combination of Saturn and Jupiter in the sign of Aquarius, which is very much in keeping with the essential energy of your sign. Now, Jupiter is the planet of growth, and it's the planet of opportunity. And if we look back through the times when it goes through the sign of Capricorn, as it did last year, very often there is some kind of financial retraction. So that was true of 2008. And it was also true of 1984, as I mentioned in my introduction, when the Eclipse series that we're now welcoming in began on the 30th of May that year. Jupiter was in Capricorn, and that was a less prodigious year financially too. So Jupiter moving into Aquarius gives us an opportunity to fight back from the ravages of COVID. But what Saturn does is it gives us the kind of self-discipline. And it's going to be in the sign of Aquarius for the next 2.25 years. It was there from the 22nd of March to the 2nd of August last year. But it gives you a chance to use that meticulous side of your nature to very great effect. So that's a real asset. So those two, opportunity Jupiter, structure Saturn, and that precision that you possess in spades, they're coming together in the enterprising sign of Aquarius. Now, of course, Saturn is the co-ruler of Aquarius, the traditional ruler, and the modern ruler, the higher octave ruler, is Uranus. Now, Uranus is a very free-spirited, sometimes rebellious influence, and it has been since March the 7th, 2019, briefly for 5 months in 2018. It's been in a part of your horoscope encouraging you to be more open-minded about the type of possibilities you can pursue in terms of higher education, information generally, holiday destinations before COVID came in, or perhaps an openness to technology. But what Uranus in Taurus also does is it meets resistance, because being an earth sign, Taurus, like yours, is very much about creating something firm and sustainable. So that midpoint, from your perspective, that occurs in your second solar house, which provides the balance of the more feminine and the more masculine energies that the turn of the year provides you, suggests getting those foundations stronger, but in a more inventive, innovative way, coming through the energy of Uranus, could meet with some resistance, because Uranus in Taurus is its least favourite position. It's in fall, it's the opposite polarity to where it's exalted in Scorpio, and of course it is the co-regent of Aquarius. And Aquarius energy is very forward thinking. So I think there's an opportunity for you to explore this year and be more independent minded and a bit more adventurous, that position of Uranus is going to clash with Saturn from about the middle of January to the 27th of July. So in terms of your chart, that creates a 6th, 9th house square, or 90-degree angle. Now, squares create resistance and they can create limitations, because if we think about it, Saturn is about stability. It's also about maintaining the status quo. It's the co-ruler of Aquarius, but it's in its dignity. It's the total ruler of Capricorn. So it's been in that location for the last 2.5 years. And for you, when it comes to creativity, flair, self-expression, romance, those are either areas that you've suffered a little bit, or perhaps you've worked so hard you've made formidable progress. So moving into the sign of Aquarius, what Saturn's asking you to do in its relationship with Uranus is keep inching forwards in terms of the reorganization, but not being too resistant to change. And because the 6th and the 9th house bring up where you should be dutiful, something that comes very naturally to you, in terms of Saturn and Jupiter, the 6th house in Aquarius, and Uranus is in the 9th house of personal liberty and freedom, what we could find you experiencing in the first 7 months of this year is a lot of frustration if you do feel penned in to a life role or a set of duties or obligations which actually stop you feeling fulfilled. Because passion is something that none of us can kind of measure. It's not something that you can put on an app and it gives you an outcome. It's something we have to assess within ourselves. And because you are somebody who can be so thorough, so precise, so meticulous in your approach, and you have a real ability to provide services to other people, to support people fantastically well, or to work in distribution or healthcare, and anything to do with that assistance makes you a real asset to any organisation. But if your job, however well paid, however worthy, however much it helps others, is no longer feeding the oxygen of your passion, then that's something that this square between Uranus and Saturn is going to call out to you strongly this year. But it could also be, Virgo, that it's you that may be resisting the change, because there's part of you that may prefer to keep going through the processes, because that gives you that sense of pattern and structure in your life, rather than being a bit more laissez-faire, which comes through the energy of Uranus and also the energy of Aquarius, particularly with Jupiter, because of Jupiter's awareness and instinct for opportunity. It's much more open to change. It's the single ruler of Sagittarius, which governs that solar eclipse that began the new series, or reinvigorated that Saros series, which began in 1984 on the 14th of December, which means that home, emotion and family are going to be big features in your thinking in the first 6 months of this year. But on the other end of the polarity, Gemini energy comes in from June the 10th, at a time when your ruling planet Mercury is in retrograde. So I think your career and worldly role come very much under the spotlight in the second half of this year. Now, going back to that Saturn and Jupiter combination. So we have the chance for you to reform. This could be about work, but it could be that even if you feel that you eat very well, there are small refinements that you could make that actually could really help. So that means becoming much more conscious of micronutrients, reading packages to be more aware of salt and sugar, cooking more food from scratch, having more fresh salads and fruits, really limiting anything that's processed to the absolute minimum, especially convenience food, and the purity of your sign, which is very much the metaphor, the archetype, if you like, of Virgo. If that's got lost somewhere in the mix and you are feeling a bit sluggish or out of shape, then really and truly the combination between Jupiter and Saturn is initially, as you make your way into this new year, asking you to look at those things. But I think work is going to come under review, particularly if you feel that you have to give more than you get, or it's just not really feeding that passion. Now, there's another critical point that occurs at the turn of the year. The moon is in the sign of Leo. Now, Leo for you is your 12th house, that's reflection, but it's opposed by Saturn, and that's in your 6th house of practicalities. What this tells me is that if your life is functioning at a very practical level, very efficiently, but you don't feel very fulfilled, or there's issues from your past that do come up, and maybe you've shown a reluctance to look at them, maybe you rationalize them, which is something that you can be quite skilled at doing, because Mercury, your ruler, is very much about the mind, and it's very much about cool logic, which you possess. And of course it's earthy, so it's easy for you to come up with a set of responses that protect you. And also because you've got such an eye for detail, you can provide counterpoints to anyone's point of view, which can be very disarming to anyone who cares for you, who may feel that in some ways you're not quite encompassing the more emotional, spiritual side of life and the dimension that's open for you to grow. So if there is anything that's not quite holistic in your existence, it is going to show up this year. I'm sorry to say that, but it will. But you can deal with that by just accepting your vulnerabilities. And that may mean for you also accepting that you're not perfect. And that's quite hard for Virgo people, because essentially creating a sense of perfection is what keeps you feeling, steady and on track. But the more you have the confidence to embrace the hidden, the shadow side of your nature, the more you're going to thrive in reforming your structures, your diet, your physical regimes, your fitness and exercise in a way which is actually going to be very positive for you. But if you are kind of denying that you might feel tired because something's stressing you or worrying you, or there may be some past hurt or psychological debris floating around inside you, which frankly I think most people have at some level, then if you're kind of too proud or needing to present too much of that perfect image to people, then that actually can get manifested in quite a negative way this year, because Saturn opposite the moon is not a lightweight influence, and it is going to reverberate out this year. So I think really you can embrace the energy of Jupiter about change, but also knowledge. Embrace knowledge to better inform yourself, but also the more out there energy of Uranus in your 9th house to be a bit more avant-garde in your approach, to take some risks, to break away from things that give you such a profound sense of routine if they are absolutely starving your being of the oxygen of joy. Because joy is really what we should all be attaining to in this life. It's not just about keeping everything together in a very ordered way, as very positive that can be. Now, not every Virgo, of course, has an addiction to tidiness. That's absolutely true. And some Virgos may have a precise addiction to not being so organised. But somewhere in your being of service to others, or finding some tangible rewards for what you do, is generally quite a common theme between all Virgo people. So your Virgoianness is going to be scrutinised this year, no doubt about it, by the combination of Jupiter and Saturn. Now, before the end of January, your ruler Mercury also goes into retrograde. And I'm going to tell you something, that last year was a kind of real splodgeathon when it came to the 3 retrogrades of Mercury. And when Mercury goes retrograde, it affects you and Gemini, the other sign governed by Mercury, more than any other zodiac sign. That's a fact. So it's important to understand what the retrogrades hold for you. So from about the middle of January, when Mercury goes into shadow, to the 11th of March, that work issue, that New Year's resolution that we usually set to reduce salt, sugar, fat, walk more, cycle more, pack in smoking, cut down our drinking or calorific goodies, blah, blah. We all do it every year. And then usually by the end of January, it's like, oh my God, that seems so long ago. And the pressures of life come in, and that kind of modifies our discipline. Well, I feel that Mercury going into retrograde at the end of January, but feeling the shadow coming from the middle of January, is going to see you have to consider some changes. And those changes may well, I feel, be to do with your job. Now, Mercury retrograde wrongly gets a kind of reputation as a time of real problems and glitches. Well, it can be, but also it can be a time of opportunity to reform what's not working very well. So, for example, if you've got a domestic routine or a domestic appliance that isn't quite working, then this is a fine time to get it sorted. Absolutely true. A fine time to apply for a job. Don't believe all this stuff, you can't do anything, and you achieve some kind of like emotional paralysis when Mercury's retrograde. That's very negative thinking, and that will just actualize your thoughts. So it's very important to see Mercury retrograde as a time that you can sort things out. Now, we are going to have a Mercury retrograde at the time in Gemini as well, because this is a year of air Mercury retrogrades. In Aquarius, in Gemini, and in Libra. Last year it was all water. That was the splodgeathon. Now, your sign, being Earth, carries water very well. It conducts it. If you think of the base of a river, it's Earth. So what does air hold for you? Well, I think it's asking you to consider your thinking and the way that you process ideas, but remember that opposition between the moon and Saturn. You can't live through the prism of ideas only. So if you like, this is the year of swords for you in terms of the tarot, and the swords can be challenging if we're too logical and not emotional enough, or we're too emotional and we need to be more logical. So that gives you a good idea of how you can deal with these Mercury retrogrades this year. But I feel that when Jupiter goes into the sign of Pisces, which will happen in the middle of May, and it's going to be there through to the 27th of July, but it does go into a retrograde from the 20th of June. That period is going to be very much about relationships. And also at the turn of the year, Venus, the planet of love and affection, is in a square with Neptune, which is in that 7th solar house that Jupiter's going to go through from the middle of May, which is all about your relationships. So Neptune square Venus, oh, it's a real murky one, you know. If there is somebody that you meet through your family, an introduction close to your immediate locality, and this person has some kind of fantastic aura about them, they could well be the one. But also they could be somebody who never ever quite lives up to your expectations. But certainly Jupiter moving into your opposite sign generally can be very good for all sorts of relationships. Jupiter is the co-regent of Pisces, so it's blessed in the sign of Pisces. So some good fortune can come from an association with someone new. It could be personal, could be a friendship, it could be in a commercial context from the middle of May through to the end of July. But because of the retrograde beginning for 4 months on the 20th of June, just be aware that things are going to ebb and flow for us all. That brings us round to that solar eclipse which occurs on the 10th of June, which is very much about ambition. So the solar eclipse which occurred at the end of last year, which reactivated the Gemini Sagittarius polarity that first began in 1984, that one gave you a consciousness about home, family, emotion, and that organisation coming through Saturn and Jupiter. And the midpoint, the second house, very much about foundations. The opposition between the moon and Saturn is asking you to embrace your vulnerabilities in your approach to your home, emotion and family. But the second half of the year really does flag up any lingering need to make a change with that job. And if it hasn't happened in the first 6 months, it may well happen in the last half of the year. But your ruler is retrograde when this eclipse occurs, suggesting that communication is going to be critically important with anyone influential, anyone who's maybe a commercial partner, whether you're considering doing a presentation and revising your CV. How you come across to people is going to be so important, and you can come across very well. But because Neptune is screwing up both Mercury and the Sun in the conjunction on the solar eclipse in Gemini, your 10th solar house, your midheaven, how you meet the world at large, where you have goals and ambitions, it's really important, if you have any interviews, that you're manifestly honest in what you say. If you try to be a little bit crafty about something, it could come back on you in the second half of this year. Mercury and Neptune in a square is the trickster combination bar none, believe me. Another thing to tell you is the North Node, which is kind of like the emotional direction of travel for us all, continues in the sign of Gemini, reverting back to 1 degree Gemini by the year's end. And that for you is fabulous, because I feel if you do feel that you're unfulfilled in terms of your working situation this year, providing you can go with the concept of change, even if you find there is part of you that resists. Resistance will be futile. It will give you headaches, I'm afraid, or nervous tension or exhaustion. There has to be a consideration of change when Uranus is so profoundly influencing proceedings in that right angle to Saturn. And it does it again from the last 5 days of November to the end of the year as well. Now, you have got an awesome opportunity on the 19th of November with the lunar eclipse in Taurus, the same location as Uranus, to try to shake things up in some kind of fundamental way around your work. But it may mean taking a leap of faith, doing something radically different, going on a training program, perhaps agreeing to do something that's outside your comfort zone, or using your own resources in order to equip you to reorientate your direction of travel in a new way. Now, that particular lunar eclipse is also squaring up with Jupiter back in the sign of Aquarius by then. So again, change is not going to come without a little bit of pain, but the potential to push forwards is there. And then on the 4th of December, we have the solar eclipse in Sagittarius. So the second within 12 months, if we consider the one in 2020 on the 14th of December. So once more that home emotion stuff comes up. Is there going to be an addition to your family? Is it someone else you're connected to that's going to have an addition? Is somebody moving close to you? Are you going to change things up to create more space? Are you going to have an extension built? Are you going to downsize, upsize? All this stuff's going to be washing around all year, I feel. But in the last couple of weeks of this year, Venus, the planet of love and affection, combines with Pluto in your 5th solar house. If you are single by December, I do feel that we are going to see more and more pushback against COVID. It's going to be a mixture of approaches. I feel that there's going to be some people who are open to vaccinations. You might be one of them, you might not. Personally, I'd be a bit resistant to the early ones because they need to be trialled. And anything new, the first Volkswagen Golf that was ever made in whenever it was, 1982 or whenever, is nowhere near as efficient as the ones they're producing now. So it's the same with vaccines. We've never found a vaccine for the flu. But there's going to be vaccines that some people will embrace. There's obviously going to be better testing, which gives quicker results. That's going to happen more at airports. There's going to be better track and tracing. There's going to be technologies that supports all that. And there's also going to be the human desire to fight back and do something more courageously. And for you, there is a point in the later middle of January, the 18th and 19th of January, when Mars goes across Uranus. If you haven't had an opportunity to break out and get away, if travel restrictions are eased in your particular locality, I almost guarantee you'll want to get away at that point. And you might book it really at the last minute, but it could be the best thing you do. A complete change of scene, kicking over the traces, will be like a big burst of oxygen in your lungs and bring a lot of exhilaration your way. So that's exciting to look forward to. But I do feel that our desire to push back and fight and continue to enjoy what we like about life, we'll see different tribes. We'll see some tribes that are more fearful. Because of my rheumatoid arthritis, I have to be really careful because my immune system's compromised. But then you'll see other tribes that say, look, life's for living, it's about becoming more informed. There's going to become more and more awareness to how to treat the condition as well with existing medication, hydroxychloroquine, which I take for my rheumatoid arthritis. Obviously, Trump was promoting it, but it has worked really well for a doctor in Texas and one in France, even if other parts of the medical community have dismissed it. And then only this week I've read it does work. It does reduce inflammation. So, there's going to be these ebbing and flowings as more information and knowledge comes through. But for you, I do feel your desire to create a new reality, even if it does giving up or changing something that's served you very well for a very long time. If you don't make some changes this year, I do think the potential for stress is there. So adaptation is part of the human condition. It's how we've survived for so long. And you're going to be leading the way because you're the one who gets the detail of things and makes things work. Other people may have bright new ideas. Someone has to come along and fit it all together and make it functional, and that's where you come in. So you can make a tremendous contribution this year, but I do think it's being open to change. Now, if you'd like to ascend above your zodiac sign forecast or your ascendant forecast and embrace your personal blueprint for 21, if you order in year 2020, whether it's September through to December, I'll give you the rest of 2023, plus your 12-month forecast for the coming year. If you order in 21, I'll give you 12 months from the time you order. But you can get this and your character analysis for 30% off a special offer. Please see the link below, or please check out having a one-to-one personal consultation with me. Please see my testimonials. But for now, I'm wishing you all the very best. Good luck, stay safe, God bless, and goodbye for now.